Okay, so we're going to begin by talking about U.S. immigration and current history and issues in immigration. So the breakdown, right? So United States has had a history of open door ajar, pet door, revolving door, storm door, a policy when it comes to immigration in the United States. And some of the current issues we have as assimilation, economics, bilingualism, multilingualism, national security, and all of those are things that are a result of how immigration has been done in the United States. And the difference between non-immigrant visas, which are for tourists, for students, temporary workers, and they usually require a stamp, is that immigrant visas are typically for those who are planning on staying and residing in the United States. So, for example, the green card or permanent residency card, and that ultimately the goal is for them to become a U.S. citizen. Now, undocumented students do not fall under these categories. So believe it or not, we did have an open door era, which with our founding fathers in the 1880s. And immigration was relatively easy and actually encouraged. This is usually called the old wave, right, of immigrants, and they usually were for Northwest Europe. And for example, in 1789, the 1789 Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, which is something that I think a lot of people would like to have now with immigration reform, but has not been possible. So here's a bit of a timeline. So in 1962, we had the Homestead Act. In 1868, we had the ratification of the 14th Amendment. In 1870, we had citizenship that was granted to those of African descent. And then we had about 1 million immigrants per year. So it was 13% foreign born every year. And that gave rise to fear and anxiety in native borns due to the fast growing immigrant population in the U.S. So the door ajar era, as many scholars call it, began in 1880 and it lasted until 1920. There was about a rate of 1 million people per year, and the shift was from to the South and Central and Eastern European, countries. And then we had, know nothings or, groups like the Ku Klux Klan led restrictionist attitudes towards immigration. And that led to a change in immigration in the United States that, still continues till this day. And so, for example, in 1982, the Chinese Exclusion Act was the very first piece of legislation that aimed at a particular race or nationality. And what it did is that it virtually stopped Chinese immigration for 10 years. And this was reenacted in 1880, 1892, and 1904. They also had that 1885 we had the Foreign Act, and it stated that it was illegal to fund immigration of others. And then in 1880 we had the Scott Act, which extended Chinese Exclusion Act for 10 years and it barred their return. And in 1889 we have the Xi Jinping versus United States, which upheld the Scott Act, which continued to bar Chinese from returning to the United States. Then in 1892, we had Ellis Island. In 1894, we had the Bureau of Immigration. In 1898, we had the Wong Kim Ark versus United States. And this was stated that native borns are eligible for naturalization, even if parents are not, right? Which is something that we still have right now. So if you're native born, you can be naturalized even if your parents were not. And then we had 1907, the Darlington one. Now, after that, we had the pet door era, and the pet door era lasted from 1920 to 1965. It was pro-restrictionist groups that pushed the Quota Acts, and those Quota Acts were 1921, 1924, 19. During this time, immigration shifted back to Northwest Europe, and it was an era of restricted legislation. And I wanted to mention briefly why it's called the pet door era and the open door. So open door, everybody can come in. Pet door, right? A pet door is a tiny little door, right? Like that we use, for the pets to go in and out. So it's a smaller door. It's still kind of open, but it's a smaller door. So in 1921, there was a 3% of population of a country. So 3% of the population was an immigrant. And then only 4% entered from 1920 to 1930. In 1924, we had the Johnson-Reed Act, which was about 2% of the population. of the country in the 1890 census that was immigrant, and then this brought about a shift back to Northwest Europe, and it barred most Asians as aliens ineligible for citizenship. Aliens ineligible for citizenship. In 1921, a proportion of the population of each nationality for the 1920 of the census were immigrants, and only 150,000 were admitted. So the door was still open, but it was very small. So if you notice here, but during the door ajar era, there was, the door was ajar. There was a lot of immigrants coming in, and then the pet ajar era, we had a significant decrease in the immigrants that were coming into the United States and admitted legally into the United States. But during this era, in 1942, we have an executive order 9066, which sent Japanese Americans to relocation camps. In 1943, we had the Hirabayashi versus United States, which upheld military necessity. In 1944, we have the Korematsu versus United States, which allowed excluded zones. And in 1952, we had the Immigration and Naturalization Act, which removed racial and national origin barrier from being excluded. So then we moved to the revolving door era, and it began with the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, which we still follow to this day, and it replaced that quota system we had in the past, which looked at different countries and so forth, and you would get an X amount of quotas per country. Into the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. Immigration in the following decades was up by 60%, and the act was amended in 1966 to allow more refugees. And then during this time, we also had California that passed Proposition 187, and it claimed illegal immigration was a financial burden. And we all know about Proposition 187 and the effects that had. We had LULAC versus Pete Wilson, which declared Proposition 187 unconstitutional. In 1996, we have the Illegal Immigrant Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. And then beginning in the 2000s, we had the Storm Door era, which began in 2001 as a result of 9/11, the terrorist attacks of 9/11. So in 2001, we had the U.S. Patriot Act. In 2002, we had the INS abolished. And duties were granted to the Department of Homeland Security. And in 2005, the USA Patriot Act improvements and Reauthorization Act were enacted. So here are some of the current issues, immigration issues that people talk about. For example, one of them is assimilation. The other one is the economics of immigration. Another one is bilingualism, multiculturalism, and national security. And why do we talk about all of this? Because all of this really does affect the educational system and affects the lives of our students and what our students go through and what we as teachers need to be prepared for. So assimilation. Many people believe that this is the first step to naturalization. For example, in the pre-1970, there was strong pressure on immigrants to assimilate into the culture and in many ways to leave their own cultures behind or to forget about them. Large numbers, there was large numbers of assimilation and fear that immigrants would not form emotional attachments to this country. Also, the idea of assimilating by acquiring skills. Naturalization, for example, the benefits of this is that, there's more job opportunities. Proponents of it say that immigrants have no problems assimilating. It should be no problem to assimilate at all. And then age is the greatest distinguishing factor because studies tell us that if you come to the United States, for example, after you're 14 years old, that it would be more difficult for you to assimilate in this country. So the older you are, the more difficult it would be for you to assimilate into a new country. Many people believe that this is still the way to go, assimilation. Economics, so the pros, we have more workers that create more wealth, provide basis for the U.S., the Social Security system and Medicare system, and most still pay income and property taxes. Even if they're undocumented, they still pay taxes and they benefit the brain to drain of other nations. Some of the cons that are typically mentioned when it comes to economics and immigration. Number one is that immigrant wages are, rapidly increasing, and there is an underground market, right? That leads to immigrants being abused because they're not paid the wages that they're supposed to be paid. Let's talk about bilingualism. Bilingualism has always been a political topic, just like immigration. It's tied to the ideas or the notions of naturalization. It's tied to the idea of patriotic behavior. And bilingualism, oftentimes, and for many years, and in our history, has been seen as something that is not as patriotic for too many, not everyone, right? Because we cannot generalize. I think that it is slowly shifting with the movement towards globalization, and and there are economic and ideological beliefs in that, right? Economic is as if you're bilingual and you're ready to mingle, you can serve more multiple populations, and it's only going to help you, right? Ideological, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier. People see it as a divisive tool, but proponents or advocates of bilingualism believe that it unifies it unifies, and it is incredible, and it helps in diversity, in growing diversity, because multiple languages are present in the United States, and it is part of who we are as a country. Bilingualism is also another topic of controversy for many, right? And we have distinct cultural groups in the United States. They're very organizational, and there's tons of conceptual borders, right, that divide different communities. But most of these multicultural communities maintain ties to home countries, right? And they're very close to home country. And some people say that they don't have a true American identity, simply because of this multilingual, multicultural identity that ties them to their own background, to their countries of origin. But when we hear these kinds of comments is when we really need to begin to question, what is an American identity? What is an American identity? Is it just one story? Is it just a white identity? And the answer is no, because we are so mixed, and because our cultures are so multicultural that, the identities of every group depends of, their backgrounds and who they are. And the other major concern is national security, and it became important in the 1920s. But we had 9/11, and we have the border, which more and more it's becoming more militarized, right? The Department of Homeland Security recently has had an identity shift. And then also there have been advances in transportation security, and there's much more creative thinking to prevent attacks. So national security is always part of our conversation in the United States when it comes to immigration. Here's some documentation of what some people who are immigrants could have. So, for example, the green card, the reentry permit, the refugee travel, the employment authorization, all of these things. And these are pictures of some of them. And you can go back and look at the PowerPoint and look at the different ones that, that I show there. But these are all allowable types of documentation. And I think I'm showing this because sometimes people think the citizenship is the only type of documentation that people can give you, or just a green card. But before the green card, you have a work permit, and it also depends on how the immigrant got here to this country. So please don't make assumptions, right? Ask. So let's talk about who's an immigrant, okay? According to the U.S. law, an immigrant is a foreign-born individual who has been admitted to reside permanently in the United States, okay? Permanently in the United States. Was an undocumented person, and again, I choose to say undocumented rather than alien or illegal alien, because I don't think anyone is an alien, right? And there's no illegal person. There's an undocumented person that lacks documents to be here in the United States, which is the difference. So an undocumented person is a person who is present in the United States without the permission of the U.S. government. And for example, someone who comes with a tourist visa and then decides to forego the tourist visa and decides to stay. Someone who has crossed the border, and undocumented, again, without using the term illegal. undocumented without having the proper documentation. So what's the difference between also refugee and asylee? A refugee and an asylee are people seeking protection in the United States on the grounds that they fear prosecution in their homeland. An asylee applies the protection while in the United States, while a refugee typically applies outside of their home country and resettles into the United States. So, just a brief summary of the 5 areas of immigration where we had the open door, the door ajar, the pet door, the revolving door, and the storm door. And, we did talk a little bit about legislation and then some of the current issues in the United States in terms of assimilation, economics, bilingualism, multiculturalism, and national security. I think these terms are really critical and important because when we talk about immigration, we don't know if we're talking about the students who we have in front of us, or even we ourselves, right? So, for example, when I first came to this country, I was undocumented until there was a law, until we were approved political asylum, and we were able to stay in this country. But during that time, while we were looking for political asylum, we had something called the work permit. And with that work permit, we were allowed to work here in this country and stay in this country, although we didn't have, for example, permanent status during that time. So I think it's really important. Terms are important in understanding what our students, how our students come, and it's really critical. Also, understanding and having sensitivity in the terms that we use, rather than using illegal alien. I remember when I first heard that term when I came here, alien. If you translate alien into Spanish, is marciano, right? And it's like a supernatural being, and so that term itself has so many negative connotations, when in reality, many of the immigrants who are here in this country because the situation in their native countries are not good, and they're looking for new opportunities in this country. So I think we really have to have a lot of sensitivity, especially as, a lot of our students come here as children with their parents. Or now we have a lot of accompanying minors who come into this country and may or may not qualify for immigration laws such as DACA. Which is the deferred action immigration law. And so, we can't also assume that every student that we have that's in high school that's about to graduate is going to be able to qualify for DACA. Now, what does DACA do? DACA gives the students temporary permission to work in the United States until they're able to get their permanent residency card. So again, it's really critical that we take into consideration that not all our students have come here the same way. That not all our students have the same histories, and that immigration and their immigration status and what they live and what their families live will affect them in school. And so as teachers, we have to be really aware of that and have a sensitivity towards that. And as you know, right now, one of the major issues we have in the United States in terms of minor immigrants is the issue of unaccompanied minors. I've had the great privilege and honor of volunteering and working with detention camps here in Texas that host unaccompanied minors. And the number one thing that I think we all need to be aware of is that no parent wants to send their children alone across multiple borders. I've had the great fortune of interviewing parents in Latin America, but also parents who come with their children, and I've had the great fortune of interviewing children who have come by themselves. Usually the majority of the time, they come with a coyote, which is a person that helps you cross the border. And the stories are pretty much the same. They leave because there is a need. They can't find jobs in their countries. Some of the children I sent to the United States because the families are either dead, they have been killed, or they're sick. And many of them, majority of them, are sent here because there's people here waiting for them, or there's a family member waiting for them. And the things that, for example, when I go to the detention centers, what I do is spend time with the kids, bring them a little bit of happiness. I have a series of activities that I do with them, and then they talk to me. They talk to me about everything that's happened. And aside from being some of the most heartbreaking things in the world, because it's so heartbreaking to see a child, a minor, um, cross the border, sometimes alone, sometimes with an older sibling. The trauma of that it's just ridiculous. And so what happens is once the kids come, what they try to do is they try to connect them with their families. Um, and once they find a family member, then the family members have to go to court. They have to prove that they're indeed family, and they go through a series of a process to make sure that they're ready to have the children with them at home. These detention centers are camps. They're like prisons. The ones that I've been able to go to are ran by for-profit organizations that are hired by the U.S. government. The nicest one has been one where you have like little houses, and in each house they have a what they call a house mom and or dad, depending on the home, because some home, they're not they own, they have female homes and they have male homes, and so that they're not mixed. Which is it's good, but when the problem arises when you have a child that came, an older brother that came with a sister, and so then they separate them. But in these places, they are provided with food. Some of them have the opportunity to go to school and take classes. Teachers do come in some of them. The majority of them, they don't. They're just there waiting, and they are provided with some counseling services. But the conditions are bad, I've been to some where children are just simply on the floor, sleeping on the floor, not even in cots and mats, but in just blankets. It is something that just breaks your heart. But I think that it's really important to understand in that a lot of these kids come here because the situations in their country are so bad that they're forced to do that. And sometimes parents are forced to do that. And what I always try to remember and remind myself is that I was one of those children that crossed the border. I had my mom with me and my siblings with me. But nonetheless, what was that like for me at that particular moment? Number one. Number two, I think, we also have to remember the trauma that brings, and that as teachers, we need to try to find ways to help them in this process.
Frightened or are misinformed about what's possible, are willing to take extraordinary risks on behalf of their kids. The surge of unaccompanied children and adults with children are arriving at one sector of the border, and that's the Rio Grande Valley. While we intend to do the right thing by these children, their parents need to know that this is an incredibly dangerous situation, and it is unlikely that their children will be able to stay.
Bueno, estamos hablando de la famosa crisis de los niños centroamericanos y mexicanos que van rumbo hacia Estados Unidos. Yo siempre he observado que hay familias completas que van hacia Estados Unidos, jóvenes menores de edad no acompañados, y también algunos niños que van con alguien que los acompaña que no son sus familiares. Ahora se dice que son tratados, que son engañados en sus lugares de origen, donde se les promete que se entreguen a las autoridades americanas y que entonces Estados Unidos les va a dar una visa humanitaria y que les va a dar todas las facilidades. Están huyendo por la crisis humanitaria que hay también en sus países de origen, la pobreza extrema que hay en esos lugares y también el reclutamiento de los jóvenes y adolescentes hacia las pandillas. Entonces, esto ha hecho que se dispare todavía la salida de los hombres y mujeres.
Ese es un centro de atención para menores fronterizos, el cual es la atención que le damos a todos los menores migrantes y repatriados de México y extranjeros. Normalmente la atención era mayor a los mexicanos, era más visible, pero en los últimos meses se ha habido un incremento exagerado de extranjeros menores no acompañados. En primer lugar que estamos atendiendo son en Honduras y en segundo lugar está entre El Salvador y Guatemala. 70% de lo que estamos atendiendo son extranjeros.
Yo soy de Honduras, de Tocoa, Colón. Quería pasar a Estados Unidos a tener mi bebé y trabajar y sacar adelante a mi familia.
Vengo de Honduras y decidí tomar este viaje más que todo porque yo miro que otra gente vive bien, que tienen sus familiares y tienen su vida bien, pues por lo menos al que no le falte nada.
Tengo 17 años y vengo de Guatemala. Nos dijeron que nos iban a ayudar y luego lo fueron a recoger allá a Tecomumán y luego lo trasladaron allá a México y estuvimos unos días en una casa y luego lo venimos en un carro y nos agarraron aquí. Mucho cuesta eso, $10,000 creo, 5 cada uno.
Cuando yo llegué a Nuevo Laredo llegamos a la casa del inmigrante y como supuestamente decían que estaban los permisos cuando uno se tiraba por el puente, yo me tiré por el puente y me regresaron de vuelta para acá. Sí quiero regresar a mi país. Es muy difícil el camino.
Yo solito me vine. Llegué a Matamoros y traté de cruzar el río ahí y unos tipos ahí no me dejaron pasar. Me pusieron las armas y todo y me decían que tenía que pagar como los demás y me querían amarrar y tirar ahí al río. Ahí. Y yo les dije que no me iba a volver a asomar ahí y ellos dijeron, no, está bien, andate entonces y terminamos aquí a la próxima. No te dejamos ir así nomás, me dijeron. Entonces por eso decidí entregarme mejor a migración.
Vamos a recorrer ahí lo que es todo el panorama del río Bravo donde se ve movimiento de rutas, ¿no?, que pueden agarrar. La tierra tamaulipeca ha sido un flujo para todos los migrantes de Centroamérica y de otras regiones. Todos por lo regular llegan al Distrito Federal, de ahí distribuyen para llegar a la frontera. Muchos al llegar a Monterrey pues, buscan una ruta alterna, puede ser Reynosa o a la ciudad de Nuevo Laredo. La mayoría de los que vienen acompañados son entre los 2 el año a los 8 o 9 años. Pero el rango mayor donde buscan ir a cruzar a los Estados Unidos es entre los 14 a los 17 años de edad. Y ahí se empieza a distinguir ya más o menos un poquito más lo que es el río Bravo. Nada más ahí que si se ve algo, corremos, por favor, sube la cámara y todo. Pues la verdad, aunque yo fuera muy buena andador, no me aventaría. Aquí el lugar se llama El Patinadero, es un centro social. Esperemos que concienticen con toda la travesía y que realmente tomen conciencia de los riesgos que hay al tratar de cruzar a los Estados Unidos. Aunque se vea el río tranquilo, es bravo.
Yo salí el 17 de junio, vine de bus en bus hasta aquí a Reynosa. De allí de Reynosa crucé el río. Caminé 4 cuadras cuando me agarró migración. Me ofrecieron agua y me subieron a la patrulla. De Mecales me trajeron para otra migración. Nos dieron un citatorio para que nosotros nos presentáramos a una corte Pero lo que nosotros tenemos miedo es que el señor presidente nos deporte y para nosotros no es bueno eso, porque ya ni trabajo hay allá. Yo me vine huyendo de las pandillas porque mataron a mi esposo. Entonces, a los días que a él lo mataron, pues me dijeron de que me iban a matar también. Por esa amenaza yo estoy aquí y he arriesgado la vida de mi hijo también.
Esta crisis de los migrantes y también de los menores que no están acompañados es algo que estamos tratando de ver cómo se va a sobrellevar, porque ahorita los centros de detención, los centros de acopio, el transporte y a su vez las cortes van a estar saturadas de niños y de grupos de familias que vienen huyendo o pidiendo refugio. Antes de esta crisis ya los estaban mandando fuera del estado a los niños, entonces ahora con más ganas, ¿verdad? No hay suficiente lugares donde detenerlos.
We are in Sacred Heart Parish Hall. It is a place where usually the church uses for different events, but it has been converted into a rest area for immigrants. What you see behind you are people that are first generation. I'm a first generation Mexican American and proud of it. And behind me you see people who grew up in an environment that said, we always help those that are trying to come over here. So that tells me we still have people in this country who remember how their parents made it, how their grandparents made it. The stories that we're hearing from the families is that whether they have a coyote that is crossing them or if they're with a group of family, there's different modes of transportation. So by the time they get to the Rio Grande River, someone will cross them over in an inflatable raft and then they tell them, just wait here until the Border Patrol sees you. And so they wait there, Border Patrol comes along, puts them in the truck, takes them to detention. And then they suffer again in detention because those facilities are not geared to hundreds of people. The families tell us they suffer in there. They're ice cold, there's no blankets except those aluminum space blankets that you see in the newspaper. They're side by side with other people they don't even know. It's very uncomfortable.
Cuando es un joven migrante que no viene acompañado de un adulto, en esos casos se les manda a un centro de detención para menores y también tratan de conseguir algún familiar que se va a hacer cargo de este pequeño en lo que tenga su fecha de corte. Cuando son mexicanos, que es el país vecino, entonces lo van a mandar más rápido. Los menores que vienen acompañados con algún adulto tienen un proceso diferente porque se les va a dar un citatorio para la corte de deportación, se van a presentar en tal fecha para ir a ver al juez, pero van a estar libres, ¿verdad? En lugar de estar detenidos. La mayoría de las personas desafortunadamente pues están sin representación legal porque la ley no les va a dar ningún abogado gratuito. Entonces los que tengan representación o hay algún lugar que les asista con la ayuda legal son los que van a poder quizás preparar su caso un poco mejor.
You know, I thought that when we began this that maybe it'll be a couple of weeks and the government will step in. Then I thought, okay, well, maybe a couple of months. We're in our second month, and first we heard maybe through September, and now we hear maybe through the end of the year. So we're prepared to stay as long as we can, but, you know, the government needs to help. It's part of their responsibility.
Yo en lo particular yo creo que es una crisis humanitaria, así como hemos visto los países, vamos a decir como en Sudán, que no pueden regresar a su país de origen porque los van a matar. Entonces yo creo que estamos llegando a ese punto, pero desafortunadamente no se está viendo así en el gobierno.
Allá casi no gana uno. Sé que poco gana uno, no es como allá que se trabaja y gana algo uno.
Cuando se da una movilidad humana de esta dimensión, nadie estamos preparados. A nivel mundial hay un desplazamiento. Yo no creo que a corto o largo plazo la situación migratoria vaya a cambiar. Y además los migrantes nos han dicho, padre, aunque pongan un muro muy alto, o nos pasamos por arriba, nos pasamos por abajo, nos pasamos por los lados, pero de que siempre va a haber esa migración hacia los países pudientes, siempre va a haber.
Creo que sí que voy a volver porque el camino de aquí ya me lo aprendí todo. Entonces ya sé cómo volver a ponerme aquí. Ya la otra vez bajé menos, en 5 días ya me pongo desde Honduras hasta acá, hasta donde estoy. Sí, da un poco de miedo, pero hay que echarle ganas porque no hay de otra tampoco.